my talk. Here we go. He said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course, and apologies for going dark last week. I had a last minute emergency that I had to take care of where I had to travel for the week, but I apologize. There's nothing much to it. I apologize. Things happen, and luckily, podcast fam, appreciate y'all for being flexible. Sorry for not leaving you with an episode. I had to kind of do things quickly, so I decided to just go dark rather than half-assing something. So I appreciate y'all for sticking by me and joining me for another week. And with that in mind, I kind of was like, kind of racking my brain around what I think would be interesting to talk about at this point, or, what I'm personally kind of working through. I think I've said this a million times, but I try to use this podcast as a bit of my personal, my journal, my diary almost, and I think try and be transparent around things that I'm not only struggling with, but things that I'm also understanding about myself, my journey, and things that I think could be beneficial to us, and it's interesting. I was having a conversation with my parents recently just about career stuff and, life in general, I guess. And I say this with all of the love in the world, but I really, in that conversation, sort of recognized how little they were able to help me work through kind of what I'm trying to process at this point in my life. And again, that's not a knock on them. I think it's more so a reflection of how much I've sort of done or exceeded, the experiences that they've had thus far in their lives. And that's a beautiful thing. I think that is right. The dream that many of our parents have for us is for us to have better, to do better, to experience more out of this thing called life. But with that, you begin to cross uncharted territory is what I've begun to realize, right? And I think probably a lot of people who are, products of immigrant families, second generation, whatever it might be, whatever your particular situation is, you recognize, you get to a point in your life, right, when you've sort of ascended, and I don't think we ever stop, learning or growing or, just being challenged by life in different ways. But what I had to kind of check my father almost, because he was sort of coming from a perspective of I'm older than you. I've gone through this thing called life. I have more experience than you do. And while that is all true, I also have experiences that he's never experienced, right? I also have a unique vantage point that he can't even speak to, right? And, I don't know if I've earned the right, or I've, I don't know. I'm at a point in life where I've seen some shit. I've gone through some experiences, and, it's unrelatable to certain people who haven't walked down that path the same way I have, right? And the point I'm getting at, in particular, as far as as it pertains to today's show, I wanted to share with everybody things I wish I knew before or while I was in kind of the earlier phases of my journey as an entrepreneur, as a creative, as somebody just finding themselves. These are things that I wasn't prepared for. And again, not a knock on anybody in my life. How could they prepare me for something that they've never experienced, But I know a lot of people on here are challenging themselves to live a life that is different than the norm, or live a life that's different than what their parents experienced. And with that is going to come a whole new set of challenges that you are not prepared for, because again, you are the first one doing it, right? You're a pioneer. You are, you know, you are exploring uncharted territory almost, right? Like if you were, back in the days of the colonizers, they didn't know what to expect when they were going to a land that had never been explored before. They did their best to prepare, but how could you really know what you were going to encounter in a place you've never been? And that's what I've begun to realize about this journey that I've been on. And again, not to say like my parents don't have good insight or people around you can't give you advice and things of that nature, but it does become challenging when you are experiencing things that the people around you haven't experienced, or you're wired just differently and you are thinking in a different way, and it's hard for people to be able to relate to you when they can't seem to wrap their brain around the way that you think, and I found myself there a lot. And like I said recently, so with all of that in mind, I wanted to share, things that I wish I knew. We're going to do 5 things that I wish I knew when I started this whole journey of just sort of living life, for myself, and living life on my own terms, and challenging myself to live a far more fulfilled and happy and exciting at times life, I guess. So these are 5 things that I wish I knew before I got started on my whole journey of finding myself and trying to make the most of this thing called life. Or shit, I wish I knew it a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years. Like, these are just lessons that I'm reflecting on now that I've either learned or I'm trying to teach myself currently. And I wanted to share that with you, as somebody who, like, those of you listening to this, most of you listening to this, is trying to explore uncharted territories that are different from those around them. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. This episode will be basically one long Mi Gente segment. Mi Gente. All right, so first and foremost, I want to start here. I want to start in kind of I don't want to say harshest, but the lesson that I am still grappling with, but that I wish I was far more prepared for. And it's the idea that life is always going to be a roller coaster ride, right? It's always going to be up and down. I think moments of calm can be obtained, they can be created, but they're just moments, right? I think, and I'm not saying this in a cynical manner. I say this from my perspective as an entrepreneur, as a creative, as somebody who is always just trying to do different things, do new things. I feel like my perspective has begun to shift a little bit, especially as I've obtained levels of success. And I'm speaking from a place of, listen, if you are a billionaire who theoretically never has to work another day in their life, maybe this doesn't apply to you. I mean, but I even, I see it in some of the tumultuous sort of lives that these rich people live, that I think I don't know. I speak this as somebody who has found success, but I haven't found fuck you money, right? Or, I haven't obtained a level of, like, where I never have to worry about anything again in my life, essentially financially, or that's in my control, basically, right? But I've been really, trying to make peace with the fact that there's no such thing as sustained calm or peace in this life. At least not, unless you're like maybe if you live off the fucking grid, you know, and you got a nice little setup over there. But even with that, it's like, you know, maybe you got to worry about bears or whatever. I don't have to worry about that here. You know, like it's or like the wind might take your little shack away. You know, like I think it's all relative. But I'm trying to talk about this in a way that is not cynical. But I think rewinding it a little bit. Many times when we go after goals or pursuits, we do them with an idea in mind that once I obtain this thing, I'll be able to like breathe this sigh of relief. And yes, it happens in small doses, right? When I got this podcast deal, I was able to breathe a sigh of relief, right? When I was able to leave, you know, working for anybody else, I had a breath of relief. When I got my house, I had a sigh of relief. But with all of those things that are blessings, they all bring their own challenges that are now new challenges that you have to work through, right? So now having my own podcast deal, yeah, I'm my own boss. Yeah, I create for a living, but I also have challenges within that. I now am on a schedule. You know, I create my own schedule, but I have to show up and create even in times where maybe I don't feel the most creative. I have to respond to emails from the team that is associated with me, right? The partnership that I have. There are expectations that come along with it. You know, I'm doing this professionally. So there are certain things that certain standards I have to meet. You know, and even if I wasn't doing it professionally, like if you are somebody who just has a podcast, like if you want to grow it, you have to accept the fact that you have to do it consistently and be good at social media and have interesting conversations and try to get different guests and all these different things, right? It's a great thing if you enjoy the medium of podcasting, but it now presents a whole new set of responsibilities and or challenges. Same thing with owning a home. It's great to not, you know, be paying a landlord. It's great to have my own space, to not have a roommate, to not have, you know, a neighbor downstairs that is yelling at me about music being played too loud or whatever. But this blessing comes with challenges, comes with new expenses, comes with dealing with the township. It comes with a lot of different expectations or challenges again. And I think oftentimes we create this fantasy of how things are supposed to be or how things will be, and we leave out all that comes along with sort of ascending to the next level, right? If you want to be an entrepreneur, if you become blessed enough to be successful as an entrepreneur, somebody who starts their own business, what happens with success? Well, now there's an actual demand on your time. Now you are maybe managing a staff. Now you are making decisions that are, you know, actually have real weight to them, right? You have expectations. You have customer expectations, employee expectations, right? You now have to rely on this thing to pay your bills, right? So it has to be successful now. You now have to give it probably even more time than you did when you were first creating it, right? So now maybe you can't be with your family as much. You can't do all these different other extracurricular activities because you have a larger responsibility that comes along with running a successful business, successful endeavor, whatever it might be. And I think as much as I sort of knew and understood that to a degree, I don't think I truly grasped the idea that on this journey, there's always going to sort of just be chaos to be managed, right? It's not going to be, you know, just calm and fluffy every single day. And now on the flip side of that, you then have to get better at cultivating those moments. But I think that's sort of the misconception. I think the perception many of us have when we are chasing what we want to do, creatively, entrepreneurially, whatever it might be, we sort of think that the peace will just fall into place once we obtain that certain thing. And what I've recognized is when you obtain that certain thing, you actually have to be even more diligent, work even harder at cultivating those moments of calm and those moments of peace. Because you now have so much on your plate that those moments aren't naturally going to present themselves as often. You're not going to have as much downtime to just sit around as much as you want to spend with people. You're going to have to be far more intentional in scheduling, okay, this is family time. This is not, like, you have to be far more intentional with how you're spending your time, what you're saying yes to, what you're saying no to. And I think as much as we sort of understand that, I think there is this misconception that with success brings more freedom. And I think it's not really that until you fucking retire, essentially, you know? And I think that's sort of what I'm grasping is there has to be far more intention to create that peace, right? Be it a morning routine, be it an evening routine, be it scheduling something every week that has nothing to do with work, right? Because I think back to when I used to live in the city, in Jersey City, there was a lot of spontaneity in that. I had a busy schedule back then, but there's a bit more spontaneity in, I would always have like friends randomly coming into town and an event's happening and somebody like, hey, you know, the people knew where I lived. I lived right in the downtown area near all the restaurants and bars and everything and stores. So it would be like somebody randomly like, yo, I'm randomly in Jersey City. Like, are you home? I'm going to pop in, or you want to come meet me down the street to grab food or grab a drink? And while I was busy, I had a bit more flexibility because I was still in the creation process, right? I didn't have deadlines to worry about. I didn't have a team around me. I was the team. So I can say, hey, you know what? Yeah, this project I'm working on, like, I gave myself a deadline, but it's not a real deadline. So I can go take a couple hours and grab a drink and some dinner with my friend and then come back and work, you know? Whereas now it's like, oh, wait, I have a deadline for this project that I'm working on. Somebody's expecting it. I have to work with them because it's a multi-layered process now where it's not just like farm to table in terms of me conceptualizing an idea, planning it, let's say content, planning it, filming it, editing it, and posting it. It's like, no, now I have to conceptualize it. I have to pitch it. I have to get feedback. I have to then plan it, get feedback on the planning, film it, edit it, get feedback on that, and then potentially be done with it, right? And again, this isn't complaining, but it's if you're operating on larger platforms, operating here and there, there's a lot more hands involved in what you're doing, right? And that's what comes along with finding success. When you partner with these bigger companies, when you're getting paid to do something, it's a partnership. So therefore, there is a lot more input that is no longer just your own solely. And that brings, again, its own set of challenges, responsibilities, and constraints, if you will. And I think that is something I wasn't particularly prepared for, and something that each time it kind of happens, and I've been getting better and better at it. You know, recently I started doing content for this amazing platform called Project Pulso that does a lot of like Latin centric content, from history to current events to pop culture, everything, you know, in between. And if you check out like a couple of my reels, you'll see I collaborated with them if you want to follow them, but it's called Project Pulso. And, you know, it's been amazing because I'm learning a lot about how to scale content creation, how to actually stick to a schedule and like a regimen that gets it out consistently and at high quality. But again, it was a learning curve of, I'm now working with like an editor and somebody, she's incredible. She's been on the show before, Kat Lasso. She's an amazing creator. So now in order for me to ascend to this next level, I'm working with her, and she's in charge of like kind of overseeing everything, but I'm getting a lot of interesting feedback from her, and it's like helping me sharpen my craft almost, right? But it is a process of like, hey, this is no longer think it, plan it, do it, and move on to the next thing. It's now a little bit more of a process to get to the finished product. And depending on where you are, your mental state, that can be kind of frustrating if you're just used to go all the time. But again, I'm now on a large platform creating content. So that's a level of success, but it comes with its own level of challenges as well. And the last thing I'll say on this roller coaster ride, this is the toughest part, right? And I think this is what I was not prepared for, didn't want to even think about, didn't want to conceptualize, is success is rarely sort of this consistent incline. And you have to be prepared for that. I think for me, it was like I was so used to leveling up. And I think once you begin to start like swimming in the larger oceans of life, it's harder and harder to ascend to that next level. So you're going to be hitting far more failures. You're going to be hitting far more lulls in your career, right? Where it's like, oh, I made this amount of money this year. I made X amount of money next year. And you're like, you just keep thinking every year it's going to keep expanding. And there are some people who are incredibly lucky where their businesses or their creative ventures, it does do that. But there are going to be ups and downs. I mean, just look at the stock market. Every single day, Apple is not up. They're one of the biggest and most successful companies in the world, but they have days where they are down from where they were yesterday. And I think that's what we also have to look at our careers, our creative journeys. For those of us who are looking into alternative paths that are outside of like corporate America, where you can count on that steady check, understand that there are going to be those rainy days, right? The idea of saving for a rainy day. You're not always going to be on the up. There are going to be certain time periods where you are on a down curve, right? And then you bounce back, and then you're down. It's like, again, the stock market. And I wasn't prepared for that. In my mind, I was just going to keep ascending to the next level, the next level, the next level. And I'm not even just talking about financially, also from like an ego self-worth perspective, where you're so used to, you get into a role, right, where you're just like in a rhythm, and it's like, oh, this is working. And then you have a loss here, you have another loss, and life gets tough, and something doesn't work out as well as it's supposed to, or a partnership doesn't, happen the way it was supposed to. The economy changes, a strike happens, all these unplanned things. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now this just became more challenging, or this industry has completely shifted from what it was when I started, and now I have to, regroup my plans. And as a result, I have to take a step back. And then that begins to, for me, the process of like, oh shit, am I not as good as I thought I was? Is my time done? Am I, right? Like all these thoughts begin to go in your head when stuff isn't working out exactly according to plan. And what has sort of helped me, or what I continue to remind myself of, because it's still a challenge that I go through, but what's been helpful, I've listened to like actors talking about this, and them sort of talking about the points in their career where they were red hot. And I was listening to a podcast with the guys from the show How to Make It in America, which is like one of my favorite shows of all time. One of the actors on it, Brian Greenberg, was sort of talking about like, because the show got canceled after 2 seasons. It was a shock to like everybody, because it was such a great show, and like a lot of people loved it, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out with HBO. And the actors are talking about how much of a shock it was to them and how much it hurt. And Brian Greenberg specifically talks about he went to a dark period afterwards, and it felt like he was sort of ice cold, and it was almost like he was burnt out from this whole experience, and didn't know if he had the strength to kind of go on and keep doing the whole acting thing and work in this industry. And he had to get comfortable with sort of riding those waves of his career, of knowing there are going to be moments where you just can't miss. But there are also going to be moments where it seems like you can't win, and you have to be okay with embracing both time periods and understand that they are both equally are part of the process. You can't have one without the other. I think that's what I've been trying to grasp as well, and what I wish I had a better understanding of is, especially when you're first starting, if you're going from living paycheck to paycheck, or being broke, or not, you're working a job that you hate, of course it's easy to change once you get a big opportunity, it's like, that's life changing. I now don't live paycheck to paycheck. I now do something I enjoy doing. Like, that's fucking, you're ascending 20 steps forward. But as you become more successful, as this becomes more of your normal life, those leaps are not going to be as big, or they're not going to feel as dramatic, right? Your success isn't going to be as quantifiable because you've already ascended to a certain level. So now it's more baby steps than it is these gigantic jumps. It's more incremental. And it's easy to fall into this place of thinking that you failed, or you're not doing as much as you thought you were doing, or that you're not as good or successful, or whatever it might be. And again, it's relative to the moment that you're in. You have to get used to the idea that it's not these gigantic leaps forward. It's more incremental steps. Like, you can't sustain gigantic leaps forward. That's not sustainable. And you have to be okay with the moments where you're sort of standing in place, or maybe you take a slight step back, or you take a little bit of a step forward. It's all part of the process and doesn't mean anything more about you. It doesn't mean that you are any less capable. It's literally just a part of life. There's no such thing as like, you're just ascending into the clouds and rainbows, and that's, once you've reached a certain point in your life, and that's all that's ever going to happen. There are going to be things that knock you down a peg and knock you down, and rude awakenings, and the rug gets pulled out from under you, and that roller coaster ride is what life is, right? Doesn't matter how successful you become or what journey you're on, you're going to get punched in the face by life at some point, and that is an inevitable part of it, and you have to accept it. And again, it doesn't mean you are lesser than who you thought you were. This is just a part of the journey. The idea that you can create this life that's free of any drama or free of any challenges, it's unrealistic. That shouldn't be the goal, because if that is your goal, you're going to be incredibly disappointed when you realize that life just doesn't work that way. Now, again, you can cultivate moments of peace. You can be far more, strict about your boundaries and who you allow into your life and what you allow into your life. And all of that does cultivate a more peaceful life, but it doesn't mean that peace and calm are going to consistently be the norm 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's unrealistic. No matter how much you love what you do, no matter how much money you have, there's always something that is going to present a challenge, and all those things will consistently present new challenges. And I did not mean to go that long on one of these 5. I'm supposed to hit 5 of these topics. But I think that might be, I think I hit you with maybe like, that was the knockout punch. That was the one I've really been just fucking woosah. Remember this. Like the thing that is when I'm like, why did nobody tell me this? That's the number one. There are a bunch of other ones though. They won't be as long, I promise. It's not going to be a 4-hour Joe Rogan episode. With that said, though, we'll take a quick break here, and then we'll be right back. All right, we are back, and talking about the 5 things that I wish I knew. Number 1, I started with life is always going to be a roller coaster. The second one that I thought was really impactful, and I was on TikTok, and the artist St. John, I think it was like an interview clip, and he talked about creating a mindset of being audacious. And I thought that was so powerful, and something I wish I had learned a bit earlier, and something I was confident enough in myself to actually engage with on a regular basis, right? The idea of being audacious. I think you have to be audacious, and audacious in a number of ways. I think audacious to believe that the impossible is in fact possible is a part of it. I think many of us dream too small. I think many of us fall into trying to think, quote unquote, realistically, right? And to be fair, I think I have always dreamed pretty big. I think I've always pushed back. We started this conversation talking about my parents. I always pushed against what they told me was going to be impossible, right? So I think I've been audacious in that sense. But I always think when I've come face to face with these things, there's a part of me, and face to face with the people who are actually doing what I want to do, being in those rooms. Once I sort of got in the room, I lost a bit of that confidence. I then sort of believed that, subconsciously, I believed that they were better than me, more entitled to this, more experienced, smarter, whatever the case might be, more talented. And I would sort of dim myself a little bit, or I would just be really anxious or shy or quiet in those spaces. And I think, as I talked about before on this podcast, people will treat you the way you see yourself, essentially, right? So in that room, yeah, I was the guy they never expected much else from what I've shown them, right? And then they were shocked when I would finally like work up the courage, or I would, get mad at myself enough that I would sort of unleash what I was capable of, and people would be shocked. But it would take so long, and I would waste so much unnecessary time hiding almost, right? And it's interesting to me when I reflect on a lot of my journey, and I think about why certain things took so long to develop. And listen, I don't want to get into a sort of routine of revisionist history, or like looking in the rearview mirror too long. I think is a better way to say that, because I think things work out the way they're supposed to. And I think there's a great deal of experience, and maybe I by being shy, I allowed myself to learn from an experience more than I would have had I have just gone in there and bulldozed it. But what I've begun to recognize is most of these people are not any more talented or smarter or even more well-read or educated than myself. And I don't mean educated in terms of degrees or things like that. What's the difference is they're audacious enough to believe that they are great at what they do, and that their voice needs to be heard, that it's not even like an option, right? And that's why so many of these people get the opportunities that they do, because they're walking around with that chip on their shoulder saying, I not only belong here, but I also am going to dominate the space that I'm in. I'm that good. And what's interesting to me is, as I've gotten into these rooms throughout the course of my entire career, and this spans from media to politics to social justice to activism to everything, when I sit down and have conversations with a lot of these people, and this isn't a knock on them, but people that I respect or people that I've looked up to, it dawns on me, and I'm like, wait, this person, smart, incredible, successful, but they're not leaps and bounds ahead of me intellectually or idea-wise or any of these things. They're just a little bit more outspoken and walking around with a bit more confidence. But I'm noticing when I'm presenting them with ideas or theories, at times it's things that never even cross their mind. And they're supposed to be the best at what they do. And here I am thinking that like I have nothing to offer, and I'm presenting them with ideas that they've never thought of, or ways of doing things that are maybe more efficient. But again, the difference is they're audacious enough to own who they are and have confidence in what they can offer. Honestly, a great example of this, big shout out to her. I always sing her praises when I think about these things. Brenda, who for a long time was my partner in all this, and was a listener of the show, and has done a tremendous amount of work with the brand Just Be and all these different things. And I hope she doesn't mind me sharing this, but I don't think she would. She's talked about this a bunch publicly, but she sort of doubted herself because she didn't have like the college credentials. And ironically, she got an offer, multiple offers, but she's been working in a school doing like community outreach, and she's become an integral part of not only the school system, but her town in California, and serving on like local boards out there. And here she is, somebody who believed that she couldn't sit in these rooms because she didn't have the educational credentials. But when she began to get that confidence in herself to actually step foot and take up space in those arenas, the people around her who maybe had better educational experience or life experience are looking to her for answers. But again, it took her being audacious to take up space for her to recognize how much she actually does have to offer, regardless of who's in the room. And I think that's a beautiful lesson. It's something I genuinely think about consistently when I begin to doubt myself, as I think about her and her journey. And, you know, just when her and I first met, she was a dealer in a casino, and no shame to any of that, but it is a far cry from what she wanted to do. And pretty quickly, she's been able to be far more in line with the vision she has for her life and what she has to offer this world of connecting people and the idea of community. But again, it's that audaciousness to say, yeah, I not only belong here, but I'm an authority. And recognizing like these other people that we put up on these fucking, pillars or pedestals, they're not that far off from where we are. They were just audacious enough to insert themselves in the conversation. And this lends itself to the third thing I wish I knew. And they kind of go hand in hand, but I wanted to tackle them separately. The idea of learning to sell. Feeding off of the idea of audaciousness, you have to know how to demand what you want and display all that you have to offer. And you have to be confident about it because, again, people will treat you the way that you view yourself. And if you are coming across as, I've always been the person, like, I don't ever want to be seen as cocky or conceited. So I, like, overly humbled myself, right? I made myself, again, smaller. Somebody be like, oh, you're killing it. You're doing this. Oh, yeah, I'm trying. What are you working on? Oh, just like a couple little things. Like, I always was, like, downplaying everything I was doing. And what does that then do for the other person? In their mind, it's like, oh shit, well, maybe what that person's doing is not that big of a deal. Maybe they're not as good at what they do as they, as I thought, right? Or other people like, oh, you're a DJ. Oh, like, are you good? Are you? Yeah, I try, like, instead of like, and who knows if that cost me opportunities because they're like, well, if this guy doesn't believe in himself, why the hell would we book him to do this or believe in him to do that? And I think we limit opportunities by not presenting ourselves in a way that sells us as somebody who is gifted at what they do and is credible at what they do, right? I think about this a lot, and it's like an ironic thing that I like have a chuckle to myself about. As somebody who works in the music industry in radio, I would constantly we go to these conferences and like you go to events and networking things, industry events, whatever. You're constantly being pitched by artists, right? Up and coming artists, and they want, whatever, they're selling you on like their vision and how great they are and blah blah blah. And I can't tell you the amount of times I've had somebody like build this whole thing up and like, in talking to them, I'm like, man, this person really seems like they've got their shit together. Like they might actually be different. Like maybe this is going to be one of those ones where I listen to it and I'm like, holy shit, I can't believe I just found the next fucking Bad Bunny or Lady Gaga or whoever it might be. Because they speak in this way that it's like, wow, they're really like, they seem like a visionary. They seem like they've got their shit together. They know what they're doing. This person is presenting themselves as like a really talented and gifted artist. And then what happens, and when I tell you this happens 99.9% of the time, what happens is I go home, I listen to the link, I put in the USB, whatever it is, I play the song, and it's one of the worst things I've ever heard in my entire life. And I'm thinking to myself, this person has so much fucking confidence and is so good at selling me on the idea of their greatness, yet they are absolutely god awful at the thing that they are like selling. And me, I'm awful at plenty of things, but I've had enough success to know that I must be somewhat good at what I do. And even with sort of having the cosigns of big companies and industry professionals, I still don't walk around with half of the confidence that this person who has, rarely ever heard a yes in their life at what they do because it's just not good. They're walking around with double the confidence as me. Like, that makes no sense whatsoever, but that's like the reality of my life, right? And that's the audacious part, but that's also them being so confident in it. They've learned how to sell themselves to somebody. And I think to myself, how many potential missed opportunities, because I've been in rooms with so many powerful people, gifted people. How many potential missed opportunities do I have because I didn't know how to sell myself confidently? I didn't know how to sell my personal brand. Even, by the way, like, and this is one I'm still struggling with, and like I'm trying to fucking knock into my brain. I was walking around, I went to a coffee shop, and I was on my way back to my car, and I was wearing one of the new Just Be sweaters that we're going to release in November. And if you're watching the video version, I'm wearing one of them right now. I'm really proud of these sweaters. It's like a really cool take on a old school like varsity sweater. But anyway, I was walking back to my car and some guy like stopped me. He was like, "Yo, I love that sweater." And in a perfect world, I would have slowed down and said, "Oh, thank you, man. It's actually my brand. We're going to be releasing them in a couple weeks. Like, why don't you, why don't we exchange Instagrams? You could check it out." That would have been the ideal thing. That's what a confident person would have done. That's what one of those artists would have done that I was speaking about, one of those aspiring artists. What did I do? "Oh, thank you, bro. I appreciate it," and kept fucking walking. And that's a small example, but that's a missed opportunity, right? And that was with somebody saying, "I see a thing you did. I didn't know you made it, but I see something. I really like it enough to tell you as a stranger I like it." Like, literally, that was handed to me on a silver platter. Think that could have been another person who decided to join this community. That could have been somebody who falls in love with the brand of Just Be and wants to be a supporter and be a part of it. That could have been another ambassador to this movement I'm trying to create. So I missed that potential opportunity because I didn't have the confidence to essentially close that sale. And I hate the word sale, but it's the one that makes the most sense. And that's one example. Right? Granted, I think, as much as I would love to have done that, one person isn't going to, control or dictate my career or the success of the brand. But that's a missed opportunity because I didn't have the confidence and I didn't have the skill set to close that sale. And in every aspect of our lives, whether you are going on a job interview, whether you're going on a date, whether you are trying to get people to listen to your new podcast or check out your Etsy store or whatever it might be, making new friends, there's a sale happening in some sort of way. As dirty as that word sounds, you're trying to sell people on why they should buy into whatever it is that you're trying to do, whether it's create a friendship, a business, partnership, whatever it might be. Have them buy into an idea. And one of the greatest things you can do is get comfortable with the idea of selling them on the thing that you believe in and having the confidence to sell them on that thing. Whew. I'm getting angry at myself all over again. Because, of course, like after he left, he like walked away, that guy. I'm like walking back to the car. I'm like fucking kicking myself and like talking all types of negative stuff. Like, that was so easy. That was a layup. Why wouldn't you just be like, "Hey, why don't you follow us on Instagram? We're releasing the sweaters in a couple weeks." Easy layup. But again, I have to get better at that sale. At selling. Now, number 4 on this list here, it's the idea of not pivoting too quickly. And this is a touchy one. This is only you know when the time is right, trust your gut type of thing. But if it's something you're passionate about, I believe you should see it through. And I'm big on the art of knowing when to pivot, of pivoting. My career is based on pivots. But I also think I've been too quick to pivot at times. And one thing that I'm trying to unlearn is the idea of jumping too quickly to the next thing. And an example of this is me as a DJ. And it's not a tough pill to swallow because you never know how things are going to work out, but it is something I'm reflecting on of like, let this be a lesson so you don't make that same mistake again. 2019, I think I've touched on this before, but I want to use it as this example. 2019, I started a party called Con Fuego. Myself, a couple different DJs from the New Jersey, New York area, and the idea was playing what we call global-based music. So it's everything from like dance hall to, Latin music, but like interesting remixes and flips and edits of them, right? Where you kind of mix a bit of EDM, but like in a more ethnic or urban sounding way is the best way I could describe it. I would examples would be like groups like Major Lazer or Diplo, people like that, where it's like, just, I don't know, interesting remixes of things, music from communities of color, but like interesting flips and edits. It's hard to describe. Tribal house, like whatever, but it's like, it's just, weird edits of different things. I don't know how to describe it. I would say I go watch some like Boiler Room sets. You can get an idea of it, of what I'm talking about. There's a really cool DJ named Anastasia. Has a good Boiler Room set that I think is an example of this. A lot of world sounds, a lot of Brazilian funk, like different things, right? Anyway, so and by the way, I'm not a pioneer of this. I'm not like, I'm the first one to ever discover it. But one of my skill sets is noticing something that I think is going to be a trend before it's a trend. And a lot of times I'm not even thinking the word trend. I'm just like, oh, this is cool. I see it popping up in different things, and I'm recognizing, oh, I see it popping up from trusted sources. This might be the next thing type of idea. That's what I'm good at. And I picked up on that. In 2019, we launched a monthly party that was doing these types of sounds and providing it in a time when it wasn't readily available. And it was successful from the start. We started at the end of 2019. So of course, pandemic hits early 2020 and we're no longer doing the events. But even then, I'm like, all right, well, what can we do? I threw what I saw personally in my circle as the first virtual party. We did it via Zoom, and I like figured out a way to like hack Zoom's audio stuff so we can all connect and do DJ sets. And like, we did two, and they were both successful virtually, and people were like really into it. And then from there, I did like a radio show, whatever. But, I began to lose steam with the DJ stuff, like mentally, and kind of pivoted too quickly. And, from the end of the pandemic and the next couple of years, I was kind of in and out of DJing, not really like something I was super consistent with. And from there, I then got bit by the bug again. And have gotten back into it. But now, fast forward into 2024, that sound that I was super into that hadn't become very big yet, it's now a very common sound amongst right below mainstream culture. Now, it's normal to do these sort of digital live sets and post them online and things like that. When I was doing the Zoom ones, that wasn't the norm. And I'm not claiming to be the first. I'm just saying I was early on that. And now you have DJs flying and touring all around the world, playing these different parties based upon that sound that they play. And it's not based upon them as like producers, which it was when I was, when I was as a DJ. It was like, you want to ascend to the next level, you have to be like a producer of this and that. It's more of like a bit more taste making now, and edits and mashups, which I've always loved doing. And I think to myself, what would have happened if you saw that project that you were passionate about through? it's possible that you could have been at this point now, 4 years later, 4.5 years later, might be 5 at this point because we started in 2019. Around this time, 2019, you could have been one of those prominent names that is known for playing this style of music. And again, we don't know what would have happened, what would or wouldn't happen, but it's the idea that I'm now living with that conceptually of what if. That's the worst feeling. Now, it's very much not impossible for me to continue that on and figure it out. And to a degree, I've kind of renewed that love for DJing in this specific lane, and I'm doing certain things and certain things are happening. But now I'm working in a space that is far more saturated than it was when I was starting out. And now these other people have years of credibility under their belt to be the people of authority in that genre, in that DJ group. Again, not impossible for me to do that. There are new people who pop up in every aspect of everything that are the next thing. But it's a far more difficult road ahead. And I don't say this like, oh, feel bad for me. I fucked up. But it's a lesson learned. Especially if you're like kind of early on something. I'm always like, what's next? What's next? Sometimes you have to let the world catch up. Or sometimes you have to let your talent, your experience, your like hours logged, you have to allow that to catch up to your passion, to your idea, right? You have to allow yourself to get the reps under your belt where your ability to be a person of authority now matches your passion for this, right? Essentially, like you get good enough to actually operate on a high level. I think oftentimes we pivot and move on to the next thing because what ends up happening is, right, and I think this is like a lot of what we were talking about before, and I'll kind of end this idea on this thought here. When you are starting from ground zero, it's easy to feel like you're breaking ground. When I first started these parties, I went from not having a party, not playing music that I was particularly passionate about, to now having a party where I could play whatever the fuck I wanted to, and I was playing to a packed room. Right? So I went from not doing it at all to having this great situation monthly. So that was a gigantic leap forward. So you could feel the energy of it. You're energized by it. But what happens eventually, 4 months of doing the party, you begin to normalize it. You expect, yeah, I know we're doing the party, but it's every month it's going to be packed. And it's like, well, now we just packed out a 150 person room. Cool, that's not that big of a deal. That was easy. I want to start doing 500,000 cap rooms. And in order to do that, you have to, little by little, keep ascending, keep doing new and different things. But the road to getting to that bigger room is going to be a bit longer than it was to getting to that smaller room, if that makes sense. And even with the pandemic, I could have easily been like, the Zoom thing worked. What can I keep doing to expand upon this? Well, now let me develop this online presence. But again, that's not as exciting. Yeah, you do the party 1 or 2 times and it's cool. Oh my God, we did something new. Eventually it's the norm. And like the process of going from 50 people on it to 60 people doesn't feel like that gigantic of a leap when it happens. But it's still progress. But that's the progress you need to then go from 60 to 100 to 100 to 500 to 500 people to 1,000 to putting up YouTube videos that get 1,000 views to 10,000 to 100,000. And it's all just steady consistency each and every week, essentially, right? In that case. But the adrenaline rush isn't as big. Therefore, you move on to the next thing that allows you to start from ground zero because anything from there feels like a gigantic leap. And I'm hoping that makes sense. And that's where we end up pivoting far too quickly. And then all of a sudden, like myself, I'm looking around me And I'm like, I still love playing this music. And now it's a fucking thing. And there are so many opportunities that I missed out, potential opportunities I missed out upon. And now it's like, well, I still love it and I feel called to do it. So I have to hop back in. And now I'm swimming in muddier water than I would have beforehand. And again, not saying it's ever too late, like it's ever over, but you made it more difficult for yourself. I'm speaking in third person now, by pivoting far too quickly and not trying to see this thing through. And by the way, that you can decide what does that mean to see it through. For me, maybe it meant, hey, you know what? Let me commit a year to putting out consistent videos of me doing these virtual DJ sets, because that's gigantic on YouTube, by the way. Now that's oversaturated. But had I have done that, I would have said, okay, I've done a year of this, and I'm either A, playing a lot of different parties that I want to play, or B, nobody cared, but at least I know I saw it through and I can close that chapter and not worry about what would have happened had I have seen it through. And that's what we're trying to avoid with that one right there. Now I'm going to take one more quick break. I'll bring you the last thing that I wish I knew. And yeah, then we'll wrap things up. But we'll be right back. All right, we are back. And last thing I want to bring up here. Ironic that's the last thing. I didn't even intentionally mean this even be like the closer. But the last thing I wish I knew was to stop obsessing over the end result. And that's easier said than done. I remind myself of this every single day. But what I've begun to learn is, and yes, I know it's easy for me to say, but I promise you this isn't bullshit. What I've begun to learn is that the least fulfilling part, not to say it's not fulfilling at all or not great, but the least fulfilling part of the process is the end result. That's the one that feels the least rewarding, or the one where the joy lasts a much shorter period of time. I'll even just like, all right, let's take the podcast episode in mind here. The best part of the podcast for me doing the podcast is the hour that I'm sitting here talking, where I'm just getting my thoughts out. I'm in a flow. I'm like, it's literally as if nothing else exists in this world except for this moment. I'm hyper present. Then I post it. Okay, cool. There's not much fulfilling about posting it online other than the fact that now it's shared with everybody listening. But that's the least fulfilling part. And I'm using this just as like a basic example. The most fun I had was doing this. The most fun I had was the interview that I was doing, the conversation I was having with somebody if I had a guest on. The editing part, probably the most boring, brutal part. Posting online, nothing exciting about that. Yeah, it's great when I hear people's feedback and all those things, but the best part about it was the actual moment of doing the podcast, of doing the interview, of having the conversation. And I think that is true in most aspects of our lives, But unfortunately, a lot of times and I think you have to have a direction of where you want to go. But when you have a direction of where you want to go, you have to also realize just because that's the goal, understanding that that's just a North Star, it's not meant to be the end all be all. Right? I mentioned that the sweater, this Just Be sweater that I'm wearing right now. And if you've been following my Instagram, you've probably seen previews of it. Even with that, I'm now wearing it and it feels, and I love it. I love touching it. I love looking at it. I love the idea that I created this, right? That I conceptualized this and brought it to life. But this isn't the most fun part. When I think about what was the most exciting thing, it was the entire process of finding a manufacturer, of finding references, of designing it, of conceptualizing what story I wanted to tell with these pieces, getting the samples in the mail, right? That was the most exciting part. That was when I was the most energized about this project. Now, yeah, I'm excited to get it out to the world, and I want to see people wearing it, and I'm excited to do the photo shoots for it and all these different things. But that is not as fulfilling as just sitting on my computer for hours, bringing ideas out of my head and seeing if they worked. That was the most exciting, fulfilling part of it. And I want to get more and more lost in understanding that. And again, it's easier said than done. If you are working from a place of like, dire circumstances of like, man, financially, like I need this to happen, or else I'm not going to pay my rent tomorrow, whatever it might be. Or I hate my job and I need this creative project to become my next thing so I can quit my job. I get why the end is something you would obsess over. But I think if you look at any entrepreneur story, anybody who's found success, it's a common thread of a lot of them sort of looking at those moments and reminiscing and recognizing those were probably the most fun parts of the entire journey of the business. And as much as they've created a life that is incredible and have all these different accolades and success and money and all that comes along with that, they would love to have the opportunity to go back and relive some of those days. And I think about that even on my come up, the days that I was broke, that I was like hustling so that I could take these trips to go network and meet people. And I was, living on a shoestring budget in order to do so. In reflection, I'm like, man, I wish I just took a second to enjoy it just a little bit more. Not to say my life now is bad, but like, that was really a beautiful adventure that I was on at that point, when I was just experiencing life and everything was new. And again, every part of our lives presents a new opportunity for enjoyment and fulfillment. But that process was so beautiful. And again, there's new processes all the time with things that I'm creating. I'm not saying it's like, oh, it's over for me. My best days are behind me. But I reflect on those different time periods, and it's like, man, those were really fun days that I wish I didn't take for granted as much as I did. Those moments that I wish I understood that while maybe I didn't have certain things that I wanted or felt like I needed, there was still so much value in that moment because of the joy and the experiences that I was having. Even with friends and things like that, right? Like, listen, I'm in my 30s. It gets more and more difficult to maintain your friendships or to actively participate in them because we all have different responsibilities. We all have different things keeping us busy. We can't just go hang out on a whim. Me and my friends used to go to fucking Atlantic City like almost once a week or like once a month, and on a Tuesday night or Tuesday through Thursday, we would just book a random, because it was cheap. It was like $39 rooms, and we would go to the Atlantic City, go to the club. We'd have ourselves a good time. I can't do that on a whim anymore. I mean, I kind of can, but collectively we can't. Or go on these random trips or things like that. Like when I went to Puerto Rico over the Labor Day weekend, I went with like two of my oldest friends, and it was a special trip because we hadn't been able to go away together and do something like that in years. Everybody had so much going on. One of my friends, he had just gotten married. The other one has a busy schedule where he works on weekends, so it's tough to get away and do those things together. And I feel like I squeezed the most that I possibly could out of that trip, and I'm grateful for it. But that was, that day-to-day enjoyment of it, being in the moment, like that's what it was all about. So the lesson I try to remind myself of is, while the goal is amazing to have, don't cheapen the fact, and I'm speaking from my personal experience, like don't cheapen the fact that every day you're getting up, you're opening your computer, and you're doing something interesting or creative that you enjoy doing. Like yesterday, I worked on some new hat designs. I adjusted some designs for a vest that we're going to be putting out and got the mock-ups back. And like when I saw the mock-ups come back from the manufacturer, the samples, they sent me pictures. I was just like blown away, like so in love with this thing that I created. And like this morning when I got up, I tried to remind myself of like, that's where the joy lies, in those moments. Like, yeah, I hope that I then and be able to put the sweaters out and the vest out and all the other pieces, and people like it and people want to buy them and people want to wear them and be a part of this. But for me as a creator, the biggest joy comes from the fact that I got lost for 3 hours creating something that I really love creating, regardless of if anybody buys it or not. Regardless of if this brand never becomes what I hope it would be, what it will be. I started it just out of a pure joy of wanting to create something, wanting to design clothing that I love, wanting to connect with people, create a community, wanting to tell a story. That's why I started it. And the goal is to be able to do that as much as possible. And if I'm doing that as much as possible, like, I need to recognize, like, this is where the fulfillment lies. Everything else is just like the cherry on top, essentially. And I'll kind of leave it at that. We'll quickly summarize all we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
All right, so this went way longer than I expected. So I apologize if I dragged it on a little bit. Obviously, I'm very passionate about these things. And a lot of it is like me talking to myself and reminding myself almost. Like, I do feel a bit lighter after recording this episode. So thank you for allowing me to do so. But I mean, to quickly summarize all we talked about, things I wish I knew. Life is always going to be a roller coaster ride. The sooner you embrace that, and the sooner you recognize that the idea of endless calm and peace is non-existent in this thing we call life, the sooner you can then recognize that you have to actively cultivate those moments and then understand that there's going to be chaos surrounding them. And yeah, you can mitigate it as much as humanly possible, but that moment of just, consistent, endless, consistent, endless calm and peace, it's never really going to come. It's like the idea of when you're like, oh, what if I get to this month, I have so much on my plate. Once I get to this month, I'll be able to relax a little bit. And you keep saying that every month. It's like, no, I'm just a busy person with a busy life. The idea that I'm going to never have to, never going to come home and not have anything to do is probably not realistic. Like, in today's world, in the life of somebody who's passionate and does different things, that's not a real thing. So rather than judging my quality of life based upon that and stressing myself out about the fact that there's so much going on, I would say, hey, this is a part of the of life. This is the embrace of it. There's going to be good moments, high moments, moments where I'm killing it, moments where I feel like I'm failing. That's just a part of it. Let me get to a place of acceptance, and within acceptance, understand that I now have to craft moments where I can give myself a bit of that release and that calm and that peace. But it's not just going to fall in my lap. Second thing I said was be audacious. Be bold, man. Be bold in demanding what you feel like you deserve and what you feel like is worthy of you. And also be bold in the confidence that you present yourself with when you go after these things, when you do these things, and when you get in certain rooms. Be audacious enough to know that you belong there. Which then goes hand in hand with the third thing, learn to sell. Develop the confidence and learn how to sell yourself as a capable person when presented with the opportunity to do so. When somebody asks you about what you're doing, what you're working on, whatever it might be, don't try to be overly humble. You don't have to be a dick, but don't sell yourself short of what you're doing. Be confident enough to talk about it as a person of authority. I am killing. I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. I'm getting to do a lot of great things, a lot of great opportunities. Absolutely. Don't try to dumb it down. Don't try to make yourself humble and smaller, because you never know who's watching, who you're talking to, and they're going to see you the way you see yourself. So if you're coming across as somebody with a lack of confidence or as somebody who's not really doing anything particularly special, why are they going to believe that you are somebody who is special or capable of doing something that is exceptional, right? If you're insecure, you're not confident about what you do, that must be for good reason. It must mean you're not good at what you do. That's what a lot of people are going to perceive. So you have to learn how to sell and be confident enough to do so. The fourth thing I talked about, don't pivot too quickly. Learn to see things through. If you are passionate about it, if you love it, learn to see it through. Regardless of externally the results, have some sort of deadline, timeline, goalpost you can give yourself that is fair, that you can properly address whether or not this is something worth continuing on. But don't pivot until you have reached that point where you can confidently say, okay, I've given this everything I have. I've really seen this to the finish line. It didn't work. Now it's okay to pivot. But don't jump ship too soon or before you've seen something through, however you define seeing it through. And the last thing, stop obsessing over the end result. The end result is generally the most unfulfilling part of the process. The most fulfilling part is everything that happens in between you setting a goal and obtaining it. That middle part, that's the sweet spot. All the lessons you learn, the new experiences you're having as a result of going into uncharted territory, that's the joy, that's the sweet spot. That's what is the magic of it all. Obsess over that everyday work that you're doing. And that doesn't mean you can't celebrate when you've achieved a goal, but understand that it's also important to be present enough to celebrate and enjoy the moment and recognize that there's value in the experience you're having as a result of doing this thing. The fact that you're getting lost in a creative project for an hour, that hour is a beautiful blessing in this thing called life. That flow state, that moment, that's the real joy. That's the real gift of going after something. The fact that you now got to experience this moment of pure bliss, that's the gift of setting a goal. That's the thing that needs to be celebrated and appreciated. And with that said, I hope you all enjoyed this episode. It's been therapeutic for me. As always, give me feedback at DJ Dramos on Instagram, at justb.nyc. Please give us a follow. I'm really excited to drop all this this new collection and tell this story. The premise of it is being a student of life. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm really proud of these pieces. I know I put a lot of work into them, so I would love for you to go check that out once we drop them. But check out, give us a follow now and show some love. I would appreciate you and love to have you part of our community at justb.nyc on Instagram. And yeah, I'll be back on Thursday with Thursday Trends. So then stay safe and we'll talk soon. Peace.